Hi, my name's Bob Grenier, and I'm a volunteer with the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. So thank you for joining me this 7th of February 2023 for Ode Aurora consurgens. And I'm asking the question, can we make the new eternal fire and earth from water, air, and ether? And as you may well know, those are the 5 alchemical elements. And the character there in the background is from I think the 15th century Aurora consurgens book on alchemy. And you can see the character is in gleaming white, radiant, with wing-like structures. And she has a serpent helically from her womb pointing down towards her feet. And she's standing on a black void. A black void. Standing with her feet abreast, or should I say, either side of it, balanced on it. And I think it speaks many, many things. So can you hear me? It's a little quiet on the audio. Let me see if I can adjust that. I don't know whether I can. Can I adjust it on the microphone? Let me see if that's possible. Is this louder for you? Is this louder? I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. I'm sorry, that's probably as loud as I can go today. So I have one other camera here. So if you can see me there, that would be great. I have a full shot of that, and I can flick over to this camera and see you over here. Okay. All right. Okay, so it's great to have you here, Cosmic Dave, WP for Truth, D2105K, David Boutelier, Corky Goss, Josh. Yes, Josh, I have received your email. In fact, I have received a lot of emails. So I'm very sorry if I haven't got round to answering everyone's today. I needed to get what I wanted to do out of the way today because on Sunday I'm going to be talking about probably the most important thing. So whilst I'm talking about this right here, Aurora consurgens, and actually what this means is rising dawn. So this is O-Day Rising Dawn, or Rising Dawn of O-Day. It's not quite the dawn, the new dawn of an old age, but it is the rising dawn of O-Day. We're very, very close to having an implicit understanding of how this works, in my opinion. And what I need to talk about actually on Sunday this week is extremely, extremely serious. I cannot underestimate the importance of taking on board what I will say on Sunday. So I'm sorry if I'm not answering your emails. I know there's been some excellent work out there. It's been an interesting exercise, this changing tax here to bring to bear the understanding that we've gained over the however many decades, but certainly my understanding built on the giants like Ken Shoulders and Matsumoto and John Hutchison and Tesla and so on, Adamenko and Roitskiev, Parkhomov, so many, numerous to count, ones that I've recently mentioned like Rodionov and Savatamova and so many. However, we can look at technologies that we've looked at in the past and look at them with a new light. Now, it's been interesting because some people have come back and they've said, well, they've come from a position, and some of these people I know, they're working on their own thing, and if this was to work, it would maybe compromise what they're working on. And listen, this will float all boats if it works. And it's another end of and a beginning if it works. So there's many ways in which anything can be improved, but my view is it's ball lightning technology. Has been since late 2016, since I visited Dr. George Eagley and gave my first presentation on the subject in Stanford, January 2017. The question was, how could we demonstrate for certain that we were seeing the effects of ball lightning, and be 100% certain that that is the case, and have the proof, and then what is it within the ball lightning that is doing the work, what are the ideal inputs and what are the outputs, and how can you shield for anything that might come off that's dangerous, and so forth. So it's been a long journey, so don't fret. Thank you to all those people that have already made a start on building GEETs. There's a lot of easy wins in this early stage. Now, I had a question that someone asked, you know, why, if all of these videos you're sharing are 10 years old, why has no one, you know, taken this forward? And someone else rightly said that, you know, when in their experience, when you were running it and you changed the load, you had to change the valve positions and so forth to maintain smooth running. And these are things that are all things that can be computer controlled relatively easily now, whereas in the 90s and noughties, it was difficult to buy an off-the-shelf Arduino which could control some valves and manage the various inputs and outputs. And so these things were just not as easy as putting a GEET on an engine and going, oh, that's interesting. And also the other point is that you know, a couple of the videos I shared today were talking about the fact that on a lawnmower, for instance, the burn ratio to money you spend on the fuel, that they were claiming that you're only burning 18% of the fuel you put in the engine. But then they were saying, you know, the GEET will burn 100% of that. And so, like, that is a huge efficiency gain, right? It's more than a 5 times value out of the petrol you put in there. One of the other videos I shared was adding a sugar sachet to a soda pop in it, and water and standard gasoline in equal parts. So it had like 1 part gasoline, 1 part soda pop, and 1 part water, and then they added additional sugar in there. And so there was an example mixture, and they showed it running and so forth. So, you know, in that instance, they're still using petrol, but that was in the main bubbler. The example that I was looking at last night with the Nodan diagram was only using a bubbler through a petrol tank, and then potentially closed looping that gas. So another person criticized and said, yeah, the problem with these systems, they don't put a load on it. And that's true, but as I said, for instance, the guy with the lawnmower wasn't putting a load on it, but it has the load of the friction of the device, and if you needed to change parameters for a specific load, then you know, that might need a different slight settings on maybe the air intake. And in those instances, you want to have a load that is consistent. And so you can think of the right way to approach this might be to solve some of these problems relatively simply, is to take a generator set, and the generator set has a controlled charge of a set of lead acid batteries, and then you have an inverter off of those batteries to power your electric devices, whatever they might be, a fridge, a microwave, power tools, or whatever. So you have this lead acid accumulator battery as a buffer, and you have a constant output charge to the accumulator. And therefore you can run the engine at one kind of rate, which simplifies the control electronics, at least at the stage before those things are sorted out. I think we've got some other things to verify first before we can move forward. And so, you know, yes, some people weren't showing a load. Okay, fine. Now, there was a video that I shared of Russ Greece's, and we're going to look at a couple of points that he mentioned as a sort of a little bit of a curiosity. And I think they tell us something incredibly valuable. Incredibly valuable. And this shows the value of open science, which at the time Russ Greece was a big YouTube channel doing open science. And unfortunately, I don't know whether he's doing quite so much of that, but at that time he was. I've had the pleasure of meeting Russ Greece in 2016 in Constigliani di Asti, and we had a lot of fun together. And yeah, what he did in that video is extremely important, and I'm going to go through that today. But he wasn't using a hydrocarbon or a carbohydrate to run his gen set. He was actually just taking hydrogen from a hydrogen bottle. And the interesting thing about that is obviously there's no carbon in there, and he was also feeding it air, which has oxygen and nitrogen. And then when he closed the off the hydrogen, he ran it kind of closed loop. Now, when people do these sort of closed loop experiments, like in the lawnmower experiment, where they had this lawnmower retrofitted, they closed off the exhaust. This is also what Russ Greece kind of did. But in Russ Greece's device, and possibly also in this other device, he had a kind of the exhaust coming out, but he also had the exhaust feeding into the vacuum of the GEAT system. And he then also had an additional place where he could add in a little bit of air. I might have got that wrong, but anyway, it's neither here nor there to the arguments I'm going to make tonight. But as we said at the sort of live test using the Parkhomov Philip Power MFMP reaction calculator, we added nitrogen in there because nitrogen is 78 and a bit % of the air that you breathe. And so that is another component to go in there. And if we're talking about natural ball lightning, well, natural ball lightning typically occurs in the air in the environment that we live in. And therefore, whatever causes ball lightning must necessarily work in a predominantly nitrogen and oxygen environment. Now, in air, typically, there will be some humidity. It's very rare there is zero water in air, okay? Just doesn't happen in most places that you would see ball lightning. And so if there is some moisture in the air, you will also necessarily have hydrogen. So there we have hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen. And with that, I'm going to refer to the first extended ball lightning reaction table that I shared in my Stanford presentation, and we're going to build off that with some of the slides that I shared with regard to the NOVA experiment, which gave us our first look at what ball lightning could do and the output products, and then the supernova reactor and what that showed us. But in all of those cases, it didn't give us a 100% certain answer. It wasn't until we had the eastern valley of the Vega Valley, eastern plateau from Henk Uren, and the analysis of that, that we found the categorical proof that ball lightning produces particular elements in favor in structure. And that tells us and confirms the observations of Russ Greece. It confirms how the energy potentially can be provided, and how this could work moving forward. And it also implies that you can make a water car with this. And you actually need 3 components. You need air, which may contain water, but let's just call the air oxygen and nitrogen. You need water, H2O, so the additional element there is hydrogen. So you need air, water, and the ether. And when you combine those 3 elements with the fractal toroidal moment that is existent in ball lightning, you result in the production of the new fire, which is the eternal fire, a sun-like body that then yields earth. And by earth, I mean the bulk constituents of which the ground is that we stand on. That is silicon dioxide. Okay, so Ode Aurora consurgens. Can we make the new eternal fire and earth, lowercase e, from water, air, and ether? What I will talk about on the weekend is this image that I took on the 3rd of September 2019 in Alan Goldwater's Magic Lab in in California rather. And it is a toroid, a phallicosoliton in this case, and it has a something going on down here. And I will talk about this, but I believe that this is an exact equivalent. You have your dagger coming through with your vortex coming in, the snake in the center here. And this is the goings on. This is the workings. This is the workings. Okay. And this is from that book from the Middle Ages. And something down here, this dark sphere, this dark circle here. And we're going to talk about that. I shared this first in my posters, which is why it was necessary to publish those and find those and publish those last week. And when you understand what you are looking at here, it is going to both delight and horrify you. I mean that. It's going to delight and horrify you. I said at the time to Alan Goldwater, when people understand this image, this SEM and related SEMs, when they understand this, it's going to literally melt people's brains. Literally melt people's brains. Now, the symbol for my remote view site is this one. And this effectively, in my view, is the opposite of this. Now, we've seen on John Hutchison samples the opposite of what you're looking at here. So we have a void in here. We have a void, we have a void, and we have a void. This is material, and this is material, okay? You can see a torsional type moment here, and on another one of these Lion footprints from the Lion 1 reactor, you can see material has moved from one side to the other. So some matter is being spun around this, and we know that this is copper oxide. We've shown that this is likely a superconducting toroid, or at least 2 toroids. What you need to know in these systems is the minimum fractal structure is 2, 2, 2, 2, 2 all the way down. Okay, so but it has to at least be 2. You could have 2 with 3 around it, or 2 with 7 around it on each one. You know, it has to be balanced at each fractal level. but the minimum fractal is 222. And I will do another video tying together cavitation with the Lion reactor with other systems all the way through to galaxies, like I did with making galaxies previously. This is like a phallico-soliton, and as I showed in the ultra experiments, that produces a toroidal moment, and so I'm going to talk about that. But essentially, this one here, I believe, is a medieval diagram showing this brilliant white dress, this brilliant white that gets emitted from the exotic vacuum object as it's doing its work with these rays coming out. And there's this zone down here, which I believe is represented here. In this case, it's the opposite type. So one is a yin, one is a yang. Now, the nova reactor here, you can see we've got a ball lightning that hit here. Now, we have a quartz sphere there, putting ground up charcoal in there. So that is the nova reactor running. Sadly, the person that built this reactor died at 40, so that's a lesson to be learned. This is magnetically separated material in the Masaryk University SEM department there. There it is on the SEM stub. And this was live capture of the first of the iron-rich crenellated spheres that I found in my research field. And what they're looking at in this slightly shiny blob is a ferrosilicon piece of material. So you've got a little bit of iron here, but it's predominantly silicon dioxide. Silicon dioxide. Okay. And here we go. Silicon 17 and a bit percent and oxygen 39 and a bit percent. Now we got all the usual suspects you get. We're looking at spectrum 2 here, and this is a much higher concentration of some other elements and a much higher concentration of iron, which you will see when I show you on the next slide. Okay, so here it is. This is a close-up of this. And over here we have spectrum 1 showing the silicon dioxide on this blob. But note, it does have a little bit of iron. So it's not surprising, not unsurprising that this was able to be magnetically separated from the charcoal fragments. Over here we have the iron here, and you can see this is 51.5% iron. Has some other elements here. Obviously the carbon's gone down, the silicon's basically not there, and then we have this ratio of oxygen, and you can see the ratio here is similar to that which we have observed in other systems since. It was Fe2O2, I think, which is the highest oxidation state that's ever been observed, and it was synthesized in Diamond Anvil in China, I think, in 2017. This might not be it might actually be pure iron to a degree. It might have been reduced in some way, but anyway, the point is that this is a crenellated sphere. And the other things that you can note in this shot is that you kind of like have fields coming off here, and you have like fields of these various microspheres. So there seems to be a north-south arrangement here with a big straight line, and then there's things coming off to the side, things coming off to the side, things coming off to the side that way, things coming off the side that way. Bizarrely, there are these blobs on here, so it might be that on the sphere itself there are separate sub-magnetic domains on which some of these smaller microspheres are binding, and that would speak to a structure that has other magnetic domains on it. This one here actually is hollow on the top. There's a big hole in the top of this one, and we've seen that thing before. And then there are two spots on these things, and if we look on the next slide here, we found that there was a hole on one side, and on the other side there was a sphere of carbon. This one didn't have the sphere of carbon, it just had the hole where the sphere would be. So it looks like there was a phallico-soliton that, as this overall structure died, maybe the remnant of the toroidal structure shifted as the whole thing was collapsing from the magnetic core, and the iron was coming back into our 3 space, and the original flux just ended up, and you just got whatever material was trapped inside it and dumped as a sphere on one side here. Okay. And then in this shot here, I go through the various elements that are in there. So we've got a bit of, everything is nothing. Aluminium definitely on these balls, the little balls. Silicon definitely on the little balls. But it's iron on the big balls. So you have aluminium and silicon to a degree on these smaller balls. Okay. So that is the first of the slides here that I'm going to be showing. And I will go and find something else for you to look at right now. So just give me a second. So that is seeing some silicon. Okay. So now I'm going to look at a presentation I gave a long time ago, but I'm going to skip through a bunch of slides here. This I call Tree of Life Part 1. And so we have a Sumerian tree of life here with the thing coming up, and at the end you have the fleur-de-lis, and the animals are eating the fleur-de-lis. And this was on 23rd of May 2021. And based on my my poster presentation in 2019 at ICCF 22, I focused on this belief that the Earth is the 4.5 billion years worth of experimental evidence of what EVOs or charge clusters or lightning strikes or tectonic plates and the electric fields and discharges in there will end up producing. And here you can see, as I was talking the other day, that the bulk of the bulk of the elements of the Earth by this data set is about 46.1%. I think I said 52% the other day, but there are some variations, but let's call this 46.1. This is off Wikipedia, I think. Silicon comes in at 28.02. So together we are looking at what? That's 74.3%. So nearly 3/4 of the crust is just silicon and oxygen. So we would expect any system using ball lightning, in my view, coherent matter, nuclear transmutations, fractal toroidal transmutation systems, to produce a lot of silicon and iron if it starts with the right kind of materials. Aluminium here is next, and we saw aluminium in the ball lightning in the Nova reactors, and then we've got iron next. We saw that as well. And then we saw calcium, we saw sodium, we saw magnesium. We saw all of these elements here, and potassium. And when you add those all up, this is most of the elements in the periodic table. Now, if we are saying we have a little sun in here, then we should consider the C&O cycle. And I spoke about this again in early 2017 as being important in a STEAMIT blog. And this starts with 12 carbon, okay? And this is a catalyst. But the sun actually builds from the PP chain, the proton-proton chain, up to a point that it has synthesized enough carbon. And then it switches into the C&O cycle, and different suns, right? And in the C&O cycle, it's this, right? So once you've gone through the PP chain, then you end up in the C&O cycle, and so the protons come in, goes to unstable nitrogen, and then 13 nitrogen. That decays, giving off a positron and a neutrino, and that produces 13 carbon. 13 carbon gets hit with another proton. That then produces a gamma and decays to 14 nitrogen. Another proton comes in, and you get a gamma coming out, and that goes to oxygen 15. That decays with a neutrino and a positron. That goes to 15 nitrogen, and then it comes over to here, and you get hydrogen coming in again, and you get an emission of helium. So in this case, in the C&O cycle in suns, the carbon here is essentially acting as a catalyst, goes round in a loop. And this is why I was saying that potentially Tesla and Brown and Matsumoto and Sviatomenko and ourselves, we see a lot of carbon. And the reason is, if you get to carbon, when you're doing other nuclear reactions, it kind of makes a lot of carbon, right? And it also produces helium. This is not deuterium fusion helium. This is the C&O cycle production of helium. Now, what you will notice in this cycle is that if you had no carbon to begin with, but you did have nitrogen, you start here, and 78% of the air you breathe, 78% of the air you are breathing right now is 14 nitrogen. Of the nitrogen in the atmosphere, there is about, I think, 0.25% or something. It's not a lot, but of 15 nitrogen. Now, if you had a system where you had hydrogen, like in Russ Greece's system, coming in, and you had nitrogen from the air, then you could end up in a scenario where you are either starting here with your 78% of the air and the hydrogen that he's putting in, or you're starting here with a 0.25% of nitrogen and the hydrogen you're putting in, and guess what you synthesize? Guess what you synthesize? If you have these two things in here, you synthesize carbon, okay? No carbon in your reactor, and suddenly you produce carbon. Now, why is that interesting? Okay? Well, I'll show you in a little while. Now, George Oshawa did the carbon arc in air reaction tree. Carbon arc in air reaction tree. So this is what? Carbon, hydrogen, because you've got moist air, and oxygen and nitrogen. So you have hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen. Sorry, I missed one thing I wanted to talk about down here. This is the triple alpha. And when you've got alpha particles, if you get two fusing, you get beryllium, and the another one fusing, so you get three to come together, you get synthesis of carbon here. So in a system which is able to take either spin nuclei or non-spin nuclei, non-spin being 4 helium, hitting the outside of your superconducting superfluid condensate of electrons, these fluidized electrons, on either the outside of flux filaments or closed flux filaments, Acc single flux loop EVOs, which can then cluster to multiple toroidal EVOs. On the outside of those, the 4 helium, 3 of those can force themselves together in that scenario, because there will be no Coulomb barrier because of the shielding, the screening of the superconducting superfluid condensate of electrons, and we can get carbon. And if you have 4 of them, it just goes straight to oxygen. Okay, so in short, the George Oshawa cycle, and this was presented on the Stanford presentation on 25th of January 2017, and I extended George Eagley's diagram from George Oshawa. You get essentially almost every element in your body being synthesized, and all you need really is protons and either carbon or nitrogen. Okay, in fact, all you really need is protons and nitrogen. Okay, because if you go back here, if you start with nitrogen 14, you end up with producing carbon. If you start with nitrogen 15, you end up producing carbon, and the helium will go around, blah blah blah, and you'll also get oxygen synthesized. So you will end up with these scenarios. So literally just starting with carbon or nitrogen, you will end up by producing all of the elements pretty much that is needed for life. Now, with more water in play, Sundaresan and John Bockris replicated this work, but they actually did it underwater using carbon rods, and they produced iron, and they only produced iron when there was oxygen present. Now, they say oxygen 18, and that is to balance out the number of neutrons in the product at the end here. But I have shown using the Parkhomov reaction tables in the past that you get to oxygen 18 in an environment where you have proton capture into lower isotopes, with the input of antineutrinos and electrons, so electron capture, producing neutrons and synthesizing the oxygenating. So there's a step-by-step process that you can get there. This is one way, but what they found was if they had boiled the water and removed dissolved gases from the water and they dissolved nitrogen in there, they did not see the production of iron. But if they, having removed the gases by boiling from the water and they dissolved oxygen in there, they did see the production of iron and helium. They saw the production of iron and helium. Okay, so this was the first time that I realized the deep importance of potentially the paramagnetic nature of oxygen. Okay, I'm going to see if there's anything more relevant here in these slides. So Yul Brown talked about producing carbon with his systems. Takaaki Matsumoto said he produced carbon. We produce carbon in line. This is shoulders. This is at the Moscow Nuclear Physics Institute. And these are the flowers that get produced from an EVO strike. We've referred to this, which is an EVO from Bogdanovich living for 2 days. And here is a similar structure on the work of John Hutchison. And here's another mark on the John Hutchison. And this is the same structure that I was showing you earlier with the ball in the center. This is the ball. In this case, it's... I think I've got this. I got it here. Yeah, I'm focusing through. So this is when you actually look at this in using a camera. This is actually a sphere. It looks like a piece of glass that's embedded in the center of this monopole structure. Okay, and we talked about this in the past, and we talked about the flux loops, and we talked about the vortical structure on here, and the fact that it synthesized calcium, which is decalpha. And so forth. So I won't go into that in too much detail, except for I think it's relevant to talk about the production of carbon from lead. So if you're starting with heavier elements, you also get that as well, and that's in Matsumoto's work. Okay. I also, you may not have clocked this, but this was an SEM taken by Alan Goldwater, and you can see down the bottom here there are these vortical sections here. Okay, and this is a broken segment of some of these kernels that I call them that are from the wall of the Vega Valley. And so you can see that they have a hollow core and they are cylindrical. So inside these smooth outer areas, and I believe that this is this cone-shaped disruption that comes out of the center of the fractal toroidal structures that are present in the Vega Valley. Okay, so I will go back to my mugshot, this one, and I will get a different presentation for you, and we will be nearly off to the races in terms of explaining what I need to explain today. So what do I want to do next? Yes. So we didn't really have a categorical certain thing about the production of silicon, although it was done by, claimed by George Oshawa. The actual reaction vessels in the NOVA experiments were fused quartz, so they had silicon and oxygen in there. So as we've seen recently from Klimov's work in his inflow plasma vortex system, around the outside in their quartz tube they've actually seen the plasmoid scoop off a little bit of the silicon, or certainly it's removed. And we also saw this in some of the experiments by Alexander Parkhomov. So it likes to consume or capture matter, and since both silicon and oxygen, silicon 28 and oxygen 16, are both non-spin bosonic material, they'll get sucked in when an EVO hits them. And we've seen this in the anode of the Vega experiments by Henk Uren also. So I could not say that this was caused by how should we put this, by synthesis. It could have just been captured from the body of the material. Now, when we got the supernova reactor, I did a deep dive study into that structure, and I found on the body of that structure items that looked self-organized, and we'd seen something similar before. So here is an image from a tapestry which has these flux filaments trailing off the main ball lightning structure, with your yin yang in the middle and your black and your white segment of your yin yang. And this is from desert tribe cultures, and how they know this knowledge has always amazed me. But anyway, you see in the work of Matsumoto, you see the segmented structure, and exactly the same segmented structure in the work of an EVO strike on the inside of the aluminium microwave chamber. I just made it grayscale, but it's the same proportions in every respect, even the same division placements, and I didn't rotate or anything. It was just hilarious. It's just exactly the same, you know. Maybe it's just sort of one quanta it gets to, and that's what it was. And this was it in color. So it's on the inside surface of here, and I just overlaid. There's this double layer outside. So I will go into more detail about what's going on in here. But this is really the coherent layer where the material gets pulled into, and this is likely to be the hollow void inside of this structure. And given that this is aluminium, it kind of basically probably just cleaned off everything in there as it kind of settled in. And we found many impact structures. So here is an impact structure here, and I've just done different lighting on it, and you can see it's segmented, and on the inside it's got glass that is kind of swept around. It's got a peak here and a trough here. This is kind of like the yin yang that we saw in the flux structure as symbolized in the Rajasthani tapestry here. You have your yin yang. Well, it's here, okay? And this is under different lighting. You have these like filamentary bits coming out, and then the overall area. And I liken this to the core of a plasmac, which was Paul Kollak's 1973 concept for the way that ball lightning works. And this was cited by J.R.R. Roth in his 1994 submitted 1995 paper in fusion technology as probably the best way to consider the structure of ball lightning. Okay, so I believe that we had a ball lightning structure in the supernova reactor. It either captured or synthesized silicon in there. And as I showed you before, and I'm going to go there now in that other presentation, there are two principal paths to silicon. Okay, so the first in those slides is the one that I've been talking quite a lot about, and that is the nitrogen fusing to silicon. But there's also another one. There is carbon and oxygen. Okay? Now, in the work of Ruggiero Santilli, in his so-called magnecules, and I would argue that they are caused by magnetic charges binding to oxygen, and then that being the thing which causes most of the reactions to occur, it's playing a kind of catalytic role, but not, right? When you have carbon and oxygen, or just nitrogen, you can end up by producing silicon. And he had underwater massive carbon electrodes. So he had these massive carbon electrodes underwater, and he called it the thunder machine or something, I don't know. But anyway, and he discharged between them. And when he looked at the anode of the big carbon rods that he had underwater, he found it was composed largely, or had a lot of silicon on there. Okay? Why would that be? Well, I think you know. It would be because he had carbon and oxygen from the water, and they fused to make silicon. Okay? So you do not need nitrogen in there to make silicon. And we know that nature is telling us that silicon is the second most desirable thing to make when you are doing LENR, in my view. Okay. So back to this one. So we got many examples here. Here is the overall area. You end up with a toroid in the center, and this is kind of like a hollow volume here. And then this is your coherent matter layer, and then you have this skin on the outside, and things get thrown through the dead center. But it's the field around this torus in here that does the work. So kind of like what I was suggesting with the other balls that were produced in the Nova reactor is that there was a torus in there, and it was this fractal tori. It built this hollow crenellated microsphere, but as the whole thing collapsed, the material that was confined by the field in the center came out and made a ball, or the thing that was around it collapsed a little bit. Whatever, you ended up with it moving a little bit and leaving this phallico-soliton sort of impression on the surface. It's kind of one way that I hypothesize it might have occurred. Okay. Anyway, so this is October the 24th, 1973. So this pattern is well out of date. So here's some other marks that we saw in the review of the material, and you can see when this impacted it here, it left this fuzzy area around the outside and the deeply affected area in the center. Here's one with a pentagonal mark on the outside. There we go. You can only see it under certain lights, the differently affected area. This sort of light area, you can see it. Here's one with a truncated triangle type thing. I've talked about these in the past. And we saw these structures in ultrasonics and cavitation, matching the work of Matsumoto. We saw clusters of these structures. This was Bogdanovich, but prior to that, we had seen it in other work. So what I'm arguing here at some point, if I can get to it, was that there's two scenarios here. One, the silicon was synthesized in the ball lightning in the core by either fusion of nitrogen and nitrogen from the air, because it's an open-ended reactor and it had nitrogen in there, 78% of the gas in there was nitrogen, or carbon and oxygen from the air fused to make silicon. So there's two paths to silicon there. Obviously there's oxygen in there, so you can get silicon dioxide. Oxygen, in my view, is this paramagnetic material that gathers the monopoles, and so enables this process to happen to a degree. And so either it went through and it synthesized it and went into a neutral EVO and went through and deposited it on the aluminium on the inside, or it was captured as it went through. And because it was captured, possibly could be captured as it went through, I kind of had to discount this. And one of the reasons, this was difficult to accept is because we'd seen later in the line reactor that an EVO structure had been boring through fused quartz. So this is fused quartz, this is fused quartz, and we have a yin-yang structure. It's a fractal version. You see your hexagonal thing here, and you can see that it is boring through the material. So we know it does interact with it. Is this carbon? Whatever it is, I still have to find the tools and the right time and the money to go and analyze this to find out and nail exactly what this is. But anyway, there it is. It's doing that interaction. And we did the interaction here and so on. So I think that's all I need to say here. It's another line interaction. Okay, so that's probably all I need to say there. Okay. I quite kind of like that splat mark here because there's this little dimple in the middle. And there's another one here. It's piled on there. Okay. Right. So essentially what I'm arguing here is that we saw in a number of systems the production, or we saw the presence of silicon being bundled into a lump and moving around. And that is predicted by the Oshawa chain reactions, which are ball lightning reactions. Okay, so I'm now going to go and look at my notes, which I have on my phone and on my computer. So let me do that. Just make sure I get out everything I want to say today, this evening. So bear with me. Okay, that's actually more about Sunday's presentation, so give me 1 second. Right. Okay, so I need to go to Russ Greece's... Okay, so the first one I think we'll probably look at is the closed circuit gate. Let's have a look at that. Why not? It's not really a closed circuit. Quite. Now, whilst I'm getting this video queued up, I discussed how essentially, if you have a coherent matter system and it gets hit by energy, the energy is hitting something that's a large quantum macro object, a macro quantum object, and it's acting like one single particle. So energy coming in just adds energy to the overall wave function, right? Now, we've discussed energy in the form of, say, gamma rays or X-rays, and that's why you don't see the radiation on the outside of the system. But what if it is energy in the form of matter? If the energy comes into that thing and that matter is has a higher binding energy than any ordinary matter, and it has these weird toroidal moments that are able to rip matter apart, then it could hit that and be decomposed into raw energy and just become energy in that overall wave function. Okay, so this is like your Star Trek shield. Okay, now when that wave function collapses, and we know from, say, our work with the Amarza gas on 10-yen coin and the work of Rodskiev in the exploding metal foils, that when a ball lightning is formed and it starts to break up, it can often go into smaller ball lightning and micro ball lightning, okay? And they are subquanta. Now, if you can imagine those subquanta to have their own macro quantum energy state, and when they start to collapse, the wave function collapses, there is a template monoatom beside it, the prima materia, the raw energy is collapsing, and next to it has a philosopher's stone, the seed crystal, the template for that matter to collapse into, or a couple of atoms that are bordering it when it does that collapse, which are single atoms, so they express their wave function, and it crystallizes off that. This is how I've explained in the past, and actually for the first time did at dinner with Russ Greece sitting next to me in Constigliani di Asti in, I think it was June the 5th, 2016. This is how I explained how I see SV Adamenko's system working, because it produces what he calls an electronuclear macro cluster where there is no atoms of ordinary types, and Ken Shoulders called it a quark soup, and he describes that periodically a stable nuclei will form. Well, the most stable nuclei likely to form is a proton. So if one forms, and he says then it can leave the coherent matter, it leaves, and then you have the ejection of a proton. So that's Piantelli's production of protons. So that's one thing. And obviously Matsumoto and others and ourselves have observed the synthesis of carbon and oxygen and so on. So this is nuclear regeneration in the terms of Takaaki Matsumoto. But when you have that initial production and other atoms are following it, like follow the leader, this is how I explain where you get these accretion disks, these copper accretion disks, and you get the electronuclear macrocluster hit on this pure copper pin, and it blows up, and then over that disk you get a blob that's like almost all lead, and you get a blob over here that's like 73% gold, and a blob over here that's mostly zirconium or whatever, right? And that's because the energy contained in that coherent matter when it collapsed, that is the thing that it was the easiest quanta to collapse into, and they all collapsed into the same thing because it was a whole bunch of coherent wave. And so what you might have a scenario in a Geat engine, and in fact in any ball lightning technology, is that you don't actually see those mega electron volts out most of the time. What you actually see is a number of atoms produced from the energy that was captured in the overall quantum coherent system. So by that I'm saying that if you have input, and I think we calculated that it was, what, 35 million electron volts to convert one CH4 into oxygen, okay? Now, it would be great to have all of that 35 million electron volts rather than the 5 electron volts you get from CO2. What happens if that quanta of energy in the coherent matter is added to by a series of these overall reactions, and the matter is just consumed? And the balance of the energy leads to the synthesis of, say, one proton. Well, one proton is what, 936 or 938, something like that, mega electron volts. So you would need, say, I think I worked it out, it was like 27 or 28 or something fusions of carbon and 4 hydrogens to oxygen to yield enough energy to synthesize one proton, and then there will be a little balance of energy left over. So what I'm saying is you don't necessarily get all of the energy out, but what you might do is have something which would explain what is actually going on, i.e. not too much energy produced, because the system likes to keep things stable. It's nature, it's the great leveler, right? But you don't have something which was curious and was poorly explained by this guy, which I'm now going to show you. Okay, so hopefully you've been with me along that argument thread here, and that is actually not the right video. So let's see what we can do here. I've actually captured the wrong video, so I'm going to try and find the right video now. So just bear with me. So the video you're looking for, if you want to do this locally, is called No Exhaust Engine Dennis Lee. So thank you to the person that shared this with me. Shows running Geat engine with no exhaust and closed loop. Okay. So this is the video here. And this is Dennis Lee. And he has a lawnmower. It's not got a load on it other than the friction of the pistons and whatever in the two-stroke engine. Okay. And sucking the gas around. But what he says is this is impossible to close loop this ordinarily. But what he says is he doesn't make a very good argument. He doesn't make a very good argument, because what he actually does is he's saying, when he comes to it, he's saying that the exhaust, let me get that bit. The exhaust, he's got the piece of tissue paper on the exhaust there, and it's running with the exhaust. So this is the exhaust, okay? So what he does is he closes this valve so that there's nothing coming out the exhaust, and he adjusts this valve. So basically it's just sucking the exhaust back round and into the bubbler, as we discussed on Sunday. And what he's saying in this part of the presentation, when he comes to it, somewhere here, is that when this is sucking in the exhaust, it's still sucking in a bit of air. And he says something, he gives some excuse for why the air coming in here, which has nitrogen and oxygen, doesn't cause this thing to explode. Now, for this to stay as a vacuum, it must be disappearing. It must be disappearing, okay? So if this is continually sucking in air here, you're getting more and more volume of gas. Now, you could argue that the oxygen is combining to CO2, but that's a gas. You could be arguing that the the nitrogen and the CO2 and the oxygen are partially dissolving in the bubbler, but it's going to saturate at some point. You know, the fluid in the bubbler, which may actually be petrol, can't absorb that all the time. Okay, so and maybe CO2 is not as much gas as, you know, but the point is that I don't think that's practical. I think what is going on here potentially is that the ball lightning, if he has one, will be fusing the nitrogen and the nitrogen to silicon, and possibly carbon and oxygen to silicon. And also there might be some conversion of moisture in the air to alpha particles, and those fusion of the alpha particles with carbon to produce extra oxygen, and so forth. Those kind of reactions that are part of ball lightning reactions, and so forth. And so essentially what I'm saying is there is conversion to the second most abundant element on Earth, right? So oxygen, the most abundant element on Earth, it's trying to get there, right? But then it's going to fuse to the second most abundant element. So for all of you out there, this is a predictor. I predict that if what I'm saying is true, that we will find in the dry residue of the bubbler, we will find some silicon dioxide quanta. So if you synthesize silicon, which we look like we did in two different systems, okay, the nova and the supernova, okay, that's pretty similar, but okay, but those two systems, if we do that, then you have the silicon taking either two lots of nitrogen, so an N2 becomes an S1, a silicon one atom, and the silicon can then take two oxygens and make silicon dioxide. So it actually takes out a N2 and an O2 from the gas that's coming in. Okay. Now you would imagine that you have a balance of N2 left over, and that would then become silicon, and you have oxygen potentially from conversion of hydrogen and carbon from the rest of the fuel. So I would imagine that you would get a lot of silicon and silicon dioxide being synthesized. We might find that in the dry mass. Okay. All right. So that being said, where have I got the kind of slam dunk proof? I'm going to find the slam dunk proof for you that we definitely will. I expect to see this with a high degree of certainty. Okay. So give me a second and I will find that. Okay, so this for me is the slam dunk of this process, and you've seen this slide before. And on this predominantly zinc plateau, zinc oxide plateau, we have a ball lightning that's broken up, and in that ball lightning we have an iron-rich crenellated sphere, iron oxide, and then surrounding that we have silicon dioxide. Okay. And then surrounding that, we have calcium oxide. And in the spectrum of ball lightning that you can see on Wikipedia, caught by the Chinese in a spectrum of lightning they were doing, they observed silicon, oxygen, and calcium, and iron, and nitrogen. Now, the nitrogen and oxygen are in the air, so that's neither here nor there, right? You can't say that's anything synthesized. But you have silicon, calcium, and iron. Okay? Silicon, calcium, and iron. Now, if we go into that closer, this is this high ratio of iron and oxygen here. And around the surrounding material here, we have a high proportion of carbon and in this area, and oxygen and aluminium. That's the third most abundant element in the crust. Look at the silicon there, okay? So lots of carbon, oxygen, silicon. Here again, oxygen in this point down here, and lots of calcium and sulfur. And we know ball lightning produces sulfur. So for me, this exploded ball lightning structure on the Vega Valley Eastern Plateau was a total slam dunk. That wasn't the only time we saw this. In ultra experiments, we saw the iron-rich crenellated sphere, and around the outside, we saw silicon and oxygen on the outside. So the same structural arrangement as we saw in the Vega Valley. Now, in this one, we just had water and a system produced coherent matter. Okay? And we end up producing iron and the silicon and oxygen. Obviously, the water's got the oxygen in there. This was in a low pressure air environment, and Henk would typically add a little bit of extra hydrogen to get it going. Okay, so going back to that video, he says, where did I put that now? Okay, so this is the no exhaust video. He's saying, he's giving not a very good reason for why the nitrogen and oxygen isn't causing this thing to explode, and it's still creating a vacuum. I'm arguing that the ball lightning that's at the concave end is producing atoms that effectively sequester the nitrogen and the oxygen that is coming in here, principally the nitrogen. Okay, so that's that one. I don't think there's much more we can gain from that particular video. Give me a sec. So in this Geek Guys video, they show, for those that are interested, they put one part petrol. They put like 1 part soda water, 1 part soda can. I don't know what soda they're using. What is it? And so, someone pointed out that in the mist. Okay, this is utterly hilarious. Someone pointed out that in Back to the Future, the professor puts a soda can. In fact, it's a Miller Lite, which is practically a soda, into his fusion reactor alongside some half-eaten carbohydrates, basically. And so what you are seeing there is exactly what you need: carbon dioxide, water, and a bunch of carbohydrates, or hydrocarbons, carbohydrates. So that's literally what you need in the reactor. And the thing is called a flux capacitor. And that, my friends, is exactly what a fractal toroidal toroid is. It's a flux capacitor because it pulls in these flux atoms and coheres them. It is a flux capacitor. It pulls them in and collects them together. It's so hilarious. Okay. All right. So so he adds some extra sugar they didn't use when they had a coffee that day, and they run it, and it runs on that fuel in their little quart jar or whatever that is. I don't know. And there we go. And they demonstrate that. But again, they're not putting a load on it. You can see the crankshaft there is not doing anything. So they're just running it for the sake of showing it running. But I guess the crankshaft is turning round, so it at least has the idling load there. Okay. So I will pull up the last video that I need to talk about. because it's very, very significant in terms of nailing, I believe, what we should expect going forward, potentially. Okay, and where was that? Not there. So in this video by Russ Greece, thank you, Russ. And this, by the way, is, 10 years ago. So I think he's got his gate in this section here, or he's got a valve or whatever. I don't know. He may not have a gate in there, but let's say that he has or he hasn't. I don't know. He's certainly got a spark plug in there, so there's EVOs being produced at some point. Oh, silly adverts. There's 2 points that he makes here. Okay. The first one is, and assuming this is a geek, but it may not be, but assuming it is, he finds that after he's run it, let me see if I can find the bit where he shows you. He sees some dirty water here, okay? He sees some dirty water, right? And that is when he's added the hydrogen and he's got oxygen and nitrogen going in. So one can imagine that the hydrogen is being burnt and it's producing water. But why is it dirty? Now, one could argue that maybe there's some oils left in there and so on. But he makes a point of going, well, this is dirty, right? Well, I'll give you one hypothesis that might be going on, and that might be that as we showed earlier in the Tree of Life video here, in his air that he is putting in to mix with that hydrogen, he's got 78% 14 nitrogen and 0.2 something percent of the air, and of the nitrogen about 0.2 something percent is 15 nitrogen. So if you chuck a bunch of protons in there, you're going to get some helium coming out and you're going to get some carbon being produced. And if the carbon is then produced, you end up with dirty water. But then what he notes is that when he curiously says, and I'm going to find the point in the video, he says that he closes the valve off so that there is no more hydrogen going in, but the reactor is still running itself. Okay, now you can imagine that you would expect the hydrogen would burn extremely quickly, right? Okay, it's gonna burn up in that cylinder. So the next thing he notes is, if I can find it, not that one. Sorry, not perfect today. What he notes later on in his video, somewhere down here, is a little curiosity at the end. He says, after he's stopped the hydrogen, it keeps burning, and what he does is he cracks it so that there's just a little bit of air going in, feeding in with the exhaust going in. What he notes is that at the end here, not that's the advert, sorry, oh dear. What he notes at the end here is, in another 5 seconds, is that, get his finger in there, where does he do it? Yeah, he's saying here, at this point, that basically it's all dry. And he noticed that nothing was coming out. Nothing was coming out. There was no water at all coming out of there. And what I argue at that point is that he is feeding in nitrogen and oxygen, and that is producing silicon dioxide, and there is no water being produced because there's no hydrogen going into the system. So what that implies is that you could start a reactor with hydrogen, which could be electrolyzed water, and then once it's running, it could run merely on air. And the way it's doing that, I'm going to show you here why I showed you that structure at the beginning of this presentation. Too many presentations. Where is it now? Okay. Okay. So what you are looking at here is at least 2 toroids. They might have subtoroids in them, but they are producing a toroidal moment here, which pulls material in here, and dark matter is pulled in from the environment over here. That is, etheric matter is pulled in from the environment because the toroidal moment goes in front of the direction of travel. Now, this is the core of the ball lightning, as I showed you, let's say, in the Paul Kollak model. And this is moving in this direction, but it's pulled back by the vacuum. It's moving in this direction, it's pulled back by the vacuum. And this would live in the concave end of the Geat rod. Okay, so the toroidal moment would go backwards into the Geat rod and produce those magnetic anomalies, and depending on how intense it was, it might cause it to go to jelly, or it might cause it to go to break up, or whatever. But it's going into the Geat rod, okay? And it's pulling material in through the toroidal moment that comes out here, and causing the nuclear reactions to go on here within the coherent matter overall structure. Okay, so it's doing what would lead to the production of the silicon and oxygen that we saw in the eastern valley of the Vega Valley, the eastern plateau. Okay, so that, in my view, is why we see no water coming out, and it would explain why the brown water's there initially, and it would also explain why the pressure doesn't build up in the other closed loop system. So this is entirely consistent. You get that large amount of energy produced by the nitrogen-nitrogen fusion. There will be a certain amount of energy produced by the carbon-oxygen. We can do those reactions for you right now. Let's do those. Why not? So nitrogen here, you can see, has 2 isotopes. It has this, sorry, it's 0.37% is nitrogen 15. So this has a half negative spin, and this has probably a quadrupole moment. It's got a 1+ spin on the 14 nitrogen. So these things will be pulled into the end of flux, okay, and so that's kind of why they get caught by the bottom of the EVO structure. I'll go into more detail and the logic behind that on Sunday. Okay. So, and if we look at oxygen here, you see this is 99, almost all of it is 14 nitrogen, and here it's 16 oxygen. And you can see this has no spin. So the oxygen is quite beautiful. It can be captured on the outside of the structure. And if we go to fusion reactions, and let's say we only have carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen, because we now have only got air going in there. Of course, there will be a very small amount of moisture in the air, as I said before, but not quite the same as actually loading the reactor with fresh hydrogen like Russ Greece was doing. Okay, so carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and we'll keep it to bosons for now. Execute query. And what do we get? Nitrogen and oxygen produces sulfur, and that's a rare isotope of oxygen. Nitrogen is the highest energy reaction out of all of those reactions, and therefore I am arguing that silicon-28 will be synthesized. We observed it in several experiments, but I couldn't be sure until I saw it on the eastern valley of the eastern plateau of the Vega Valley. Yes, it was very clear also in the ultra experiment conducted by Alan Goldwater, but it was unequivocal. The overall structure where you had the iron core and the silicon and dioxide and then the calcium oxide on the outside. Okay, the next reaction is another rare isotope of oxygen, another rare isotope of oxygen. Then you have nitrogen and oxygen there, and that also produces silicon. Okay, so it doesn't matter. The two reactions that use nitrogen and oxygen produce. So here we've got the common nitrogen and the common oxygen producing silicon. Okay, and then the silicon goes on and takes two oxygens out of the environment. Okay, and down here we got carbon 12 and nitrogen 14, some magnesium. We saw that in our experiments. Carbon 12 and oxygen 16. The common form of carbon, the common form of oxygen produces silicon-28. So this, I believe, is why you get silicon as the second most abundant element in the Earth's crust. Okay? Bang. That is done. Okay, so it's all very easy to understand. So back to that slide. All very easy to understand. Oxygen, the most abundant element in the Earth's crust, silicon, and together that is nearly 3/4 of the mass of the Earth's crust. I rest my case. Okay, I'm going to look at your questions now. But I seriously encourage people to tune in for the weekend experiment. The weekend presentation, because I will be talking about something which I believe we have all of the evidence for. I've kind of laid it out there for you, but in context of the recent things that I've shared, it really now I have to say it, and unfortunately it has some deeply negative aspects, but I think I will include the comments by Dubovic from early 2018, and you can see the stressed tone in his voice. You need to listen to what he's saying. You need to listen to what he's saying in context of the work we shared with Jacques Paranoff, with the work from 2017 with Suhas Ralkar, with that Mars gas experimentations. And when you bring all of these elements together, it becomes very, very clear what's going on. But in this particular system, I believe we can take water, air, and ether. We can use those alchemical elements to produce the new fire, the new eternal fire, and Earth. That is to say, 75% of what the Earth is, pretty much, silicon dioxide. Okay, so I'm going to have a look at what you've got here. Right. It's not just the ethics. So I'm going to work on my way back. Corky, it's not just the ethics I'm talking about here. I'm going to move my microphone in because it gets a bit quiet when I'm on this mic, this speaker, no, camera. Okay. It's not just the ethics here. It's about the safety. There's certain things that this can do. It will be obvious to you, and it will explain some things that people had kind of legendary knowledge about in the past. But unfortunately, I'm going to get it out there, because if people are going to be starting to play with these systems that employ the fractal toroidal moment, there are huge things that you have to take in board. And I, you know, I would like someone to try and see if they can guess it before I get to there Sunday. You also need to consider the Lockheed Martin awarded patent, the fact that it is using coherent superconducting electrons to produce coherent matter, and specific things it says that can do. And you combine that with Shak-Paranoff, things that I've showed you today, which I've talked about in the past. But I think of all of the presentations that I've done in my life, the one on Sunday will probably be the most important, from a point of how we deliver the new dawn of an old age. So this was this discussion here was really the dawn, the new dawn of O-Day. But a lot of things that have been talked about in weird places over for a long time will be explained on Sunday, in my view. Okay, so it's about safety. Can you detect strange radiation with a conventional radiation meter? Felix Adat. You can, if you have a sufficient flux, you can use the most conductive element in the periodic table, silver, and that will provide electrons, cause it to destabilize, and you might get breaking radiation caused by the ejected particles and electrons. That, I believe, is what Russ George saw when he had a deuterated palladium reactor, and he didn't see anything, and then he put a bit of metal in front, and he saw what he thought were neutrons, and they weren't neutrons. And then he found that when he put silver in front, but he's actually, I think he's edited his document on his atom ecology so that is now not there. But anyway, it is silver. And we know that this works because in the strange radiation shielding patent, which is free to use by Shishkin et al., he used silver powder mixed in with latex and either strontium aluminate or whatever it is, zinc sulfide phosphor. And the process, and I will do a detailed analysis of why that occurs, but basically the silver is acting as the excitor, and once it's excited, it's in the white state, and the phosphor traps it. Okay, in the case of Tesla, when he was using black, what he called dark light, to take pictures through walls, he would actually use a phosphor, and at that time it would have been zinc sulfide. So he would be able to take kind of like X-rays and whatever through a brick wall. And so these would be neutral exotic vacuum objects coming through the wall, and when it interacted, it would go through the body, and there will be partial absorption of the body, and that would project an image onto the zinc sulfide phosphor. So it's the same thing. I mean, Tesla knew it all way back when, but it was and Shishkin calls it he calls mostly EVOs charge clusters. He calls it basically static electricity, which it kind of is. It's basically static electricity, and I translated his work on that, and I think that is highly accurate. Yeah, so anyway, that's that. Silver foil, yeah, probably silver foil. There is a patent that I think it's a patent or a paper that was published at the end of last year, I think, where a Japanese group, I think it was, used strontium aluminate, which was doped with europium, and europium is, I think, the most paramagnetic so-called rare earth metal It's the one that I think the NASA team are using in their reactors. But anyway, they dope it, and they've actually created a device that it allows you to look at static fields, static electric fields, right? And so essentially they have got a version of the strange radiation shield done by Shishkin, but they've modified it slightly to include europium, so that you end up with a basic, because I think europium is a phosphor, and like the strontium aluminate will capture the charge cluster, which is the static electricity, and the europium will give you a nice light, so you can actually see it. So it's a visualization. So it's the first time that there's been something like that. Static raises hair cancelling mass. No, it's not quite right, is it? It's like you have things that repel each other, and they have to stand off from each other. Okay. It's not hopium, I say it's zirconium. Okay, so I think that the way that I normally do strange radiation is by masking this and using cosmic ray finder. You can use X-ray film, dental X-ray film. This is a real-time method. The other real-time method is to use a Shishkin detector, which is based on the boron 10 tube. I've talked about this in the past, and you change the bias voltage to something like 500 volts or something, and then you get a very different signature for the explosion of a strange radiation cluster than you get from a neutron. It's like 50 times the size in the Townsend, or whatever it is, the avalanche that you get. Whatever. The avalanche, I can't remember. I'm tired. Okay, so Josh, I've experienced strange radiation feelings from the experiments I've done, and I'm very concerned about performing future experiments. Josh, you should be. And I think when you see the abject horror, because you have to put it in context, what this conference meeting, it was in the same meeting room that I first presented MFMP work in the Friendship University in Moscow, this last Thursday of the month, every month, by the lead physics professor there. It's one of the top 2 universities in Moscow. Dubovik, they're having a big discussion about the fact that they know Bajatov died because of this exposure to this radiation, and Dubovik, who came up with the multiple toroidal extension to electrodynamics, he gets up and he says, "Look, you cannot mess with this," and you can see the passion in his voice, and he explains why. And I will explain why we know that what he is saying is true on Sunday. And there's 2 specific kind of things that can go wrong, and neither of them are very good. Okay, so you have to be, if there's no other thing you ever care about with what I have to share, if you're going to move forward with making working embodiments, you have to understand that this is a risk and how we can deal with it. Okay. Can you detect I'm using? Yeah, so Terranart, the specific items that I haven't said, essentially my horror came in September, in the middle of the night, whenever it was, September the 3rd, 2019, when I saw this, and I was seeing this in context with something that I saw in Suhas Ralkar's lab in 2017, and when I put 2 and 2 together, I was utterly mortified. And you know, it's without a shadow of a doubt, this has been already developed. I mean, I was shocked to find that the Sidewinder missile was actually developed in the early 50s, right? And it's still used on F-22s today, you know. So do not underestimate the ability of people to work this out. But there will also be an incredibly bright light that will come about what I share on Sunday. Because I think you will know for certain that we could have had unlimited energy for at least 100 years, and you will know precisely why. Okay. Yeah, I might do another presentation between now and Sunday and close the loop on the entire scientific method. I think it will literally bend people's minds. Maybe I'll do it the week after, but you will know. You will. When I saw this, it was like, oh my god, how could I have been so stupid? But we are talking long before Christ, and it will close the whole scientific method thing. Thank you. Stephen B. Hall says, I was here at the start, away in the middle, and back now. The pulled open abdomen in meaning in core of the torus. There is more complexity, and at last one fractally smaller torus. Okay, all right. Well, I'm really interested to see what you can come up with there, Stephen. And you're going to love the thing that I'm going to be talking about, which I've just referred to, closing the loop on the scientific method. Yeah, I have to thank Judy Wood. She came at a story from one angle and ended up with John Hutchison, Ken Shoulders, and cold fusion, and I came from cold fusion and ended up saying that that's explained by John Hutchison and Ken Shoulders, and that explains the event, and that it's ball lightning. I haven't checked out any of your recent videos, WP for Truth. I would like to do that. Like I say, unimaginable amounts of emails over the last couple of days. And I know this is moving from a let's see how this really works to let's see which is the best way to implement this. You know, as I said before, I would love to have the PAP engine to be simplified enough and easy to build enough that people could get a grasp on it, but that's not the case. And I don't want to miss the opportunity to look at if we can use this kind of fuel pre-processing of the GEAT and know how it works and know why it can work without actually having it, in theory, why it would work without even having something that's that combustible, like just nitrogen and oxygen. But ball lightning lives in mostly nitrogen and oxygen with a itty bitty bit of moisture. So if you're just sucking in a little bit of air, in addition to what you've got in there, and you're producing silicon dioxide in there, which was observed in our experiments, many of them, but for me totally conclusively in the Vega Valley Eastern Plateau, and to partially in Ultra, corroborating Santilli's findings, then you know, explains the unexplained things which they kind of like brush over, and it also explains the two anomalies that Russ Greece saw 10 years ago. Right, Crypto, do you think your friend alien scientist will dismiss this? You know what? Oh, God. Whatever. This is real. What you're looking at here is real. This is real. This happened, and it was a Mars gas on a 10 yen coin, and this has all kinds of transmuted material in it, and the material that's captured in the filter includes tungsten and the same transmuted material. Okay, so you know it is doing what it looks like it's doing, which is transmuting matter, and what's going on down here is what I will talk about on Sunday, relative to what we see here on this very famous alchemical text, where you see this black figurine. And by the way, I talked about this in Tesla's posture, where he's holding, you know, he's standing there in one of his most famous pictures with like a ball lightning in each hand, and he's in the same kind of posture that you're seeing in this image from the 1400s. But I'm saying you've got a right rotatory here and a left rotatory here, and you've got the same thing going on here. You've got the right vortex and you've got the left vortex here, right vortex and left vortex. Okay, that is important. You've got the right vortex and the left vortex. Material coming out of here, coming around here, and producing the moment that comes down here, pulling in the dark matter from in front of the torus. This torus is going in this direction into our concave end of our Geet rod, and that pulls matter in from this thing here. You will know 100% certainly. I've already shared everything you needed to know. The way this had to be done, it had to be done so it couldn't be undone. So you already know exactly how this works. You already know. You've had everything. It's been 5 years. This is Aurora consurgens. And if you go, let's go and have a look at Aurora consurgens here. Is it going to give it to me? There we go. Aurora consurgens. Right. Let's have a look at what this is. So, the Aurora consurgens is an alchemical treatise of the 15th century, famous for the rich illuminations. Yes, very illuminated. That accompanies some manuscripts. While in the last century, the text has been more commonly referred to as pseudo-Aquinas. I love the word pseudo when we're talking about this kind of work. The translated title from Latin is Rising Dawn. Rising Dawn. Therefore, this is Ode, Rising Dawn, or the Rising Dawn of Ode. It's the new dawn, or the dawn that is just about to come. And we can take water, air, and ether, dark matter, and we can create the new, brackets, eternal fire, and silicon dioxide, earth, lowercase. It's soil, most of soil, most of rock. Okay. I think discussing the event at all on your on YouTube is risky, so a lot of channels don't go there anymore for risk of getting a strike. I just talk about the event and I talk about the science, but yeah, we're literally talking about the underpinnings of how nature works, and you know. I've had threats that I don't know if there's any higher threats that I can have. So at this point, it's like in for a penny, in for a pound. Yeah, this is the 5 alchemical elements, and we are using 3 of them to create another one that synthesizes the last. Okay. Thanks, Estonia. He says, enjoyed every one of those 5 years. As I've said many times, this has been a deep honour to have worked with some brilliant, brilliant technical scientists around the world, technicians and scientists, and have an opportunity to see their life's work in many respects, and certainly in the case of Parkhomov and Piantelli and Matsumoto and Celani, and even Alan Goldwater. Alan Goldwater's work is so important, and you know, with the creativity and openness of people like yourself, David Boutillier, and Henk Uren, you know, real pleasure to work with everyone. So there's nothing that could possibly be better intellectually and fulfilling. So it's I'm the luckiest man alive, really. WP for Truth. Yes, I will be coming to Canada at some point. I've discussed how basically 9 Sigma have written out extinction of radionuclides from anyone's proposals. You cannot get rid of the tritium. You have 2 choices. You dump it at sea, which is the one that's already agreed, or someone provides them a method of concentrating it. Yes, they want to keep the tritium, they do not want it destroyed. Okay? So they're either going to dump it at sea, so that's off the table. Amars is not very well, so I don't know how much longer he's got. And I must go and see Matsumoto. I need to discuss particularly I need to discuss what I'm going to discuss on Sunday, but also the clear evidence that we've seen in, for instance, you know, the flux loop going through the brass in Henk Uren's experiment off the iron. These kind of things need to be deeply discussed with Matsumoto, and so I'm really keen to go and see Matsumoto as soon as possible. Because these guys are not going to live forever. Okay. All right. Well, like, it's a big place, so it might be a case of me finding an optimum place. But you know, I've already said that if Dave gets Dave's got several experiments that haven't had a proper airing, and due to his family commitments, at the moment it's not optimal. But if he gets certain things in place, I would definitely like to go there. What I can say is Alan Goldwater confirmed today that the Series 2 mass process gas mass spectrometer that we have will be serviced and fixed and operational in around about 1 month's time, and therefore the target is to be able to have some gas or maybe a device that we can run and do the gas changes that are going on. And it would be great if we could do a device that is triggered by electrolyzed water, takes air in, produces the ball lightning that we get to see on camera. We get fantastic spatial and time resolution on that, and very great bit depth in terms of illumination, so we can see into the action, and then combine that with a progression of the gases. So it would be great to see, like, if it's running and ticking over for a period of time, are we seeing nitrogen going down or oxygen going down, or are we seeing oxygen coming up, or are we seeing the production of helium, and so on. And that would just be awesome. And watch the hydrogen going down, the helium going up, maybe the nitrogen is synthesizing carbon, so then we have carbon dioxide, and we see that. You know, we would actually be able to learn with that Series 2 process mass gas spectrometer. It has a little capillary, and it has an extremely high vacuum, right? And so it will just suck a little bit of gas out, and let's say we can get the reactor closed running with a little bit of extra air going in for a couple of hours, it would be great to see the profile of gas changes over time. Bob, do you think the best method for making EVOs that are sustained for days is by using Mobius strip setup? The Mobius strip setup is claimed to make a black EVO last for about two plus days. Yes. The plasma flow water discharge system of Bogdanovich, which probably is easier to get working. You have a DC bias and then you have a few 1,000-volt pulses. And so the DC bias keeps everything going in one direction and so on. You have instability in the water, you have water vapor, and you have shear forces going on when it hits the metal. This is what he produced various types of plasma structures, the filament ones, the ring ones, the ball ones, the clusters, and also on the metal exposed, the toroidal structures moving around for about 2 days. So it would be great to have someone replicate that work, but I think given the energy situation in the world, I mean, very, very personally, on a very personal level, I have lost $400 per month, every month, in disposable income. Well, it wasn't disposable, but let's say it was disposable, just on the increase of gas prices here in the Czech Republic. And today it was announced on Czech News that the Czech Republic has the highest inflation like in the whole of Europe. So it's visceral for me right now. I would like to have bought 2 devices that I put my name down for in 2011, and I would have no problem worrying about these things right now if they were ever delivered. But I can't. I don't think any of us can rely on someone to come in and solve our problems for us. So we need to use our nuts and the best we can do to try and solve this problem ourselves. And I think you guys, you have the skills. I've seen you have the skills, so I'm pretty certain we can do this together. The Mobius strip experiment, however, is extremely important for some of the concepts that I will be explaining on Sunday. It is, yeah. Yeah, we're doing this together, Bernie. Now, it was clear to me that you don't typically get Lena effects because the carbon messes up the coherence, but you do get higher thermal effects. And you the guy that's talking about closing the loop there, he's saying you have 18% efficiency, but with the closed loop system with a little bit of extra air in, you end up burning all of the petrol in the device, and so you end up with 100% burn. So that is a 5 times more efficient burn in a 2-stroke engine, which is not so good at doing a burn anyway. So you might get better from a 4-stroke or whatever, but the idea is that it gives you extra efficiency. That in its own right is a win. But if you can do what the other guy was doing and put sugars in there, like literally go and pick berries and mix that in with the fuel, or even run it on berry juice, right? Then that would even be better. If you can run it on fermented chicken dung or cow dung, or, you know, your own food waste, that is a whole other level of better, right? So, you know, now if you are just using nitrogen and oxygen, having triggered the thing with hydrogen, in the initial instances, once you've got the ball lightning set up and you've still got hydrogen in there, I do expect from the C&O process you will have some synthesis of carbon. But when the carbon is captured with oxygen into silicon, that will go away. And then you only have nitrogen and oxygen in play, in which case the nitrogen-nitrogen reaction in the ball lightning is the most likely to occur, because it is the thing that fits things into the smallest box, and that yields demonstrated by yielding the most energy. And that therefore, if we go back to it here, nitrogen and nitrogen, that is the option from C and O. Even if you have synthesized some C, nitrogen and nitrogen going to silicon-28, and then the next most likely thing to occur is nitrogen and oxygen going to silicon-30. So the product will be silicon dioxide. Okay, and the thing about the Vega Valley, once it's made the silicon's still in the magnetic core of the fractal toroidal structure. And so the silicon can then be transmuted to iron. In the case of ultra, it's the focus of the ordinary matter and the dark matter in that fractal toroidal structure, with the easy water and the charge separation and the turbulence there doing its work. That again is located in a fixed spot, so it can go through silicon and synthesize iron. In the GEAT, the silicon will likely go and maybe as silicon metal or end up as silicon dioxide. In the fluid, it's kind of like, because it's not resonantly kept there, I don't expect you to get a lot of iron production. However, it might occur if someone gets a really sweet spot, so their ball lightning is stuck there for a very long time and it's not unstable in any way. We may see some iron-rich crenellated microspheres, and that is another thing that we will be looking for to confirm that this is or is not a ball lightning technology. Well, I'm pretty certain it's a ball lightning technology. Certainly the magnetic anomalies on the rod imply that they've been exposed to the fractal toroidal moment, and so you know, there we go. Besides distance, how else can we shield ourselves from strange radiation? So go and look at remoteview.icu. I translated Shishkin's 2013, I think it was, patent for strange radiation shielding. It is using silver as, in my view, the exciter, in the same way it was the exciter in the 1990s work of Russ George for the machuniguns that he said was coming out of his reactor. And then it uses a phosphor to trap the excited EVOs until they decay in situ. Okay, so that shielding I think is imperative. I think it's the best thing, because you can make it up as a paintable mixture and you can paint it on stuff. So you can paint it on a box that you put over your reactor. You could paint it on your clothing and it's flexible. You could paint it on gloves. So you should be able to make reasonably effective shielding. And they showed, because natural emissions from granite produce the strange radiation particles as well. What they did in their experiments for this, they actually went to some granite-rich areas where people typically felt a bit sick, and they went into the basement area and they painted this stuff on the basement floor, and they actually ended up with the people in the house feeling a lot happier. And I discussed at the time, when I discussed that patent, that this is free to use, and there is a business for people there to sell. Literally, you could make a lot of money by going out and saying, look, there's this technology. It's able to prevent harmful emissions in your basement, or reduce the emissions that could make you unhealthy in your house, and you just paint it on. You could put it under your tiled flooring or whatever. So WP for Truth says, hey Bob, if you could feed the EVO in the GEAT, could you define the elements produced? Yes. That's what I'm doing here. Right. If you're feeding it with carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen, this is what you get. This is what you get. If I put helium in there, right? If I put helium, and because I've got it set to bosons only, it's going to show me just the 4 helium, which is the one we're interested in, because that's what the CNO cycle produces. So helium, execute query. It's doing it. It's taking its time. So your 4 helium, where is it? Yeah. Has it even appeared? Did I put helium here? Or have I missed something? Helium. No. Boson only. Where is that? Okay. Why has it not done that then? It's not picking up the helium there. Why not? What have I done wrong? Picked up the helium there. I don't know why it's not. Yeah. Why is that not picking up? Philip? Let's do a fusion. Anyway, the fusion between... Oh, helium doesn't fuse with helium. What an idiot. It should fuse with carbon, though. So helium and carbon. So that's what I'm talking about. So the helium and carbon reaction there, helium formed carbon reaction produces 7. The overall reaction that goes to produce helium produces 23 or whatever MeV from 2 deuterons, but the overall reaction is 35. But its individual reactions are more important here. And so the helium is low down the list. So once it's produced, it progresses to these kind of reactions. And so this is the one that you're interested in, the common nitrogen isotope with the common nitrogen isotope. This is the one I expect to occur most. And then the common nitrogen isotope with the common oxygen isotope, this produces silicon also. And then silicon can form carbon. So silicon can form silicon dioxide. Yeah, you will get deaths from radiation with alchemy. All right, well, see you later, Crypto. I'm pretty much done for tonight. Yeah, I would definitely not want to be closer than 22 centimeters from any reactor, even if it's not working, doing anything useful. If you had shielding in place, you can layer that shielding. I think Shishkin talks about the level of change for it, but with what I will share on Sunday, there is no amount of shielding that will be able to stop this. Just none. Okay, so if your rod needs to be 30 centimeters long, you don't want to be anywhere near 30 centimeters from the ball lightning. You just don't. If that is the actual active length, you just don't want to be anywhere near. Okay? Nope. Not at all. Okay, Stephen. Yeah, I can do that. He's asking for a chat. Well, what experiments do you think are worth doing replicating that involve EVOs? I think I think that creating a PAP device would probably be the best. I would probably use a Bloomline capacitor like the one that I showed from George Eagley as an initiator of an EVO, potentially. So you get a very fast peak, whatever it is, a picosecond or whatever rise time on your discharge. And I would look to do charge clusters. And if you look at Stoyan Sargachev's most recent book on the PAP device, he's quite good in that there's a linear magnetic field which will align the clusters so that they're kind of better at clustering together. And then the thing about the PAP device is I talked about this earlier today in a comment somewhere. If you are just charging using radio frequency, you're basically storing that charge in a charge cluster, and then you detonate the charge cluster and it's released. So there's kind of, it's just like it's a charge capacitor. But if you have a radioactive source like uranite, or that John Hutchison used, this has been shown to generate by Shishkin any gamma emitter like cobalt 60 or cesium-137. Cesium-137 is a decay product of uranium. This has been shown to produce the same exact Birdies charge clusters as has been produced by cavitation and, you know, corona discharges and the Shak-Paranoff generator and so forth. And if you've got, say, whatever it is, 661.7 killer electron volts coming out from one decay of cesium-137 into barium-138, and that is captured in ions of nitrogen or oxygen, and they form a cluster, then that energy, 661.7 killer electron volts, is a hell of a lot more than the burning of carbon and oxygen giving you CO2 to give you 5 electron volts, right? So it's like let's say 1 million times more energy from one decay that's caught in the charge cluster. Then you detonate the charge cluster, you have a Coulombic explosion, and you get the expansion of the cylinder. And as that goes up, you've got a whole bunch of charged particles that go up in the toroidal vortex, and then that can be captured using the magnetohydrodynamic effect. So the PAP engine is great, and that will be my preferred choice, other than the fact that you have this problem with the monopoles coming out, the subquanta of the charge clusters coming out and infecting the metals, and then if they're not continually drained, eventually causing transmutations and failure of the metals. Okay, so adding carbon kind of shuts down the transmutation process. So, you know, you kind of like, you lose the transmutation energy, but you could still gain the nuclear energy that's stored in the charge clusters. Okay, when you get a stable charge cluster that is kept being fed, then it can start interacting with the dark matter, the toroidal moment, and capturing matter. And so that is kind of what I'm hoping more is going on in this low pressure zone. And probably after I've done the safety talk next week, I will show you how I knew 100% that what is going on, and that it was replicated by a third party without them knowing it. In fact, they still don't know they replicated our work. All right, but we shared the outcome, and this was where ball lightning in Hinck's Uran's reactor was produced. It was held, and then it periodically launched itself into the quartz anode sheath, and it leaves the mark of a strange an exotic vacuum object. And we've got them from side and top with the structures in there. Creating any awareness, I haven't seen. He's talking about a hollow comb energy generator, ferrospin energy. Is this micro toroidal, like what they call hypertoroidal? It's the same thing. I don't know. Thanks for the tip. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, if you can post some links on remote view, that would be great. Remoteview.icu. I haven't heard of Dave Parker. Felix Audet is talking about Dave Parker, and he's done something similar to PAP. I think I've set up a chat, but it only works in my last blog post on remote view, but I think it only works on the app on phones. So I don't know if people can maybe have a go at that. And I think maybe on the chat you might be able to send private messages to people. I don't know. Anyway. Okay, I'm just going to quickly look through and see if there's any questions. If you've got any questions I didn't answer that you were trying to ask earlier, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to do a very, very brief recap. And then I'm going to go and sleep. So Harry asked, is any dangerous strange radiation caused by geek process? I think absolutely certainly. However, strange radiation has been shown to protect and stimulate growth and protect against subsequent exposure to harmful radiation. This was done by a Russian guy. I can't remember. He begins with P. Panchaev or something. Anyway, he tested on mice with exploding metal foils and arcs and stuff, and some were exposed either before with a cancer-causing dose of gamma radiation, and some were exposed after. Now the thing is that this causes cells to accelerate growth. So if you do it before, you get an acceleration of white blood cells, and that stops cancer from getting a hold when you have it post-exposure. If you have cancer already in play, then it will accelerate the cancer's growth. So this device is possibly something that's better for people who are young and more negative for people that are old. And so the older you are, the more you should want to shield this. The younger you are, maybe not so, but like I wouldn't take the risk. And with the things that I will talk about on Sunday, you will categorically know it's absolutely mind-bogglingly horrific what can occur. It's literally spiritual level. So someone mentioned today that they did some, Paul Pantone went to some university or something, and they were doing some experiment, and they were looking for some sort of emissions or whatever. But there was a guy that had some X-ray film, and he had lead gloves on, and then he had the X-ray film in its packet in his hand, and he got an exposure of his fingers through the X-ray film. This is one comment that 100% confirms what I will be talking about on Sunday. So you have to respect this. It's either not going to work, either you won't be creating the effect and you'll be safe. But as I said to people at a C.I.C last year, if you're never going to be successful in Lena, then you don't have to worry about protection, right? If all you want to do is just get grant money and you know, get your pension and die, then that's fine. But if you want to achieve something here and make a working embodiment, you have to be aware of the risks and you have to know how to mitigate for them. Yeah, well, I can't run anything that produces fumes in the city here, but I have a place in the forest, and I would love to have this running off the berries that are abundant in the forest around. Like it's just completely berry powered. uh, Bob, how do you get energy from a black Evo? I guess it does not provide. So I will be talking about that on Sunday. You're thinking about it wrong. It is it's absolutely monstrous, but it is the also the opportunity, and it is basically how it works. But you know, go and look at Lockheed Martin work, go and look at the Shaq Paranoff work, go and look at what I've shared today, what I've shared since 2017, and it'd be great if someone could work it out before Sunday. But anyway. So David Lapont's work, you know, I don't know because I've not had access to his material, but he is creating effectively a this. It is it's in theory creating a kind of like a pseudo monopole, the same kind of structure that the one or the other toroids create themselves, fractal toroids. Yeah, microwaves is okay, but um, you know, if you can do it without doing microwaves, that's why I like this Geet system. If it's creating these, you're effectively chemically starting the plasmoid, the plasma structure, and then once that's running, it feeds itself. Um, and effectively, as I said, if I to go back to it, um, it is our friend here. She is feeding herself. So the fractal toroidal moment comes out here. The matter gets pulled in, and by the way, from the center of here, there's a strange radiation track coming out here, like it did on the vibrator plate from Amasa. But anyway, um, ordinarily, if this wasn't locked into the paramagnetic tungsten, it would want to move in this way, in this direction. But regardless of the fact that it isn't moving this direction, it's still got the toroidal moment going out in this direction. So the toroidal moment it goes out in this direction, and something else goes down here, and this will tie together so many different authors' observations on Sunday, and it's just the implications that just you need to be aware of. And this, in my view, is the opposite of this. So this type of structure has one type of horrific implication, and this type of structure has another horrific implication. So we looked at the first structures that gave us iron-rich crenellated spheres and silicon. And then we went on to look at an old presentation called the Tree of Life, and we showed that oxygen and silicon are the top elements in the crust, nearly 75% of the crust. So these are the elements you would choose to see, you would expect to be synthesized. Oxygen first and then silicon. Okay, it's not surprising they get excess oxygen, and it's not surprising to me that Scintilla saw with carbon rods under water, where you have oxygen and hydrogen, the production of silicon. And I believe, as I've said since early 2017, that the CNO cycle is important, as is the triple alpha process and the PP chain. But the PP chain is not necessary where you have carbon in place. You end up being in the CNO cycle synthesizing helium, and then the helium can fuse with the carbon to make oxygen and so forth, and produce the elements from carbon and oxygen producing silicon, or nitrogen and nitrogen producing silicon. Okay, and then these are all the elements from a ball lightning process, which create all the elements in the periodic table. All the elements that in your body, pretty much. Okay, and then that was that. And one last one. Have you still got it up? I showed in, was it that one? No. I'm going to fall asleep now. In the Lenna Systems comparison here. This rather lovely section of a tapestry I have with the coherent matter layer and the yin-yang in the center. That is the torus in the center. This is the what looks like an empty hole but isn't quite an empty hole. And then these are your flux tubes hanging off as it's flying along. And we saw the various structures on the wall of the supernova reactor, and they were silicon like this. And this looks remarkably like a splatted plasmac. And this is the US Air Force's last great comment on ball lightning in fusion technology, published in May 1995 rather, by J.R. Roth, referring to this 1973 patent by Paul Collock. And in the center you have this toroidal. It has a poloidal and toroidal moments, okay, and it's not defined, but this will be the fractal toroidal moment because they didn't know it then. It wasn't, no one knew it in Russia. It's outside of Russia. It wasn't until 1997 that the toroidal moment, the toroidal moment extension of electrodynamics was demonstrated in the West, in Colorado, I think, in Boulder, Colorado, verified in a couple of atoms. And so you have the toroidal thing in the middle, and this produces this sphere with this zone here, which we know and love, and it produced all these different things. And this is a cluster of structures in Bogdanovich's work. And we observed something a little bit before that. So where was it? In Lena in a can, is that the one? Yeah. Before Bogdanovich published his work, I can't remember who spotted it. You know, it. Yeah, okay, but it was spotted in a water arc discharge in air. So we have a spark, we have air which has oxygen and nitrogen, and it produced a cluster like this. So this was found in December the 4th, 2018, but it was actually published in 2016, long before Bogdanovich published their cluster structure. Okay. Okay. All right. I think I'm done for the evening. So in answer to the question that I posed today, Ode, rising dawn, or in Latin, Aurora consurgens. Can we make the new eternal fire and earth from water, air, and ether? I would argue, yes, we can. And all we need to verify is that we have silicon or silicon dioxide synthesized in our reactor. I would expect some to form and be captured in the chamber. I would probably suggest that people's bubble chambers are not silicon dioxide, so we don't have that in there. Of course, there might be silicon in aluminium, and there might be silicon in the metals, in the generators, for instance, or the engine. So I would also specifically look for iron-rich crenellated spheres. If either of these things occur, then we're onto a winner. But it is possible that we could use the Cirrus 2 process gas mass spectrometer that Alan Goldwater has in Santa Cruz in California, and if we see the production of helium the reduction of hydrogen, the removal of nitrogen, or the increase of oxygen in a closed loop system, then I think we will have very, very compelling evidence for this being a nuclear reactor. So with that said, I will say buenas noches, dobranoc, good night. I'll see you in the next video.